Honey, kids, get in the car. We're going to Texas for vaccines. A look at the Coloradans traveling out of state to get shots. COVID cases and hospitalizations are plateauing and not really at a low point. Inside those numbers, though, there's reason for optimism. So let's talk optimistically tonight. Xcel outlines just how much more it wants you to pay for all that expensive natural gas it bought when Texas's power grid did a faceplant. We are starting and ending in Texas. Giddy up. This is next. Colorado's restrictions on who can get the COVID vaccine right now have people driving to Texas. Down there, just one pre-existing condition or your willingness to say so will get you the shot. And Texas is more than happy to welcome vaccine tourists. Here's Steve Steger with that.
I put a few books on tape and got in the car. And
Matt Hubbard and Peggy Valdez decided, why not?
We drove down to Amarillo and got in line about 9 o'clock when the clinic opened.
I got shot in the arm yesterday and then turned around and drove home.
Both qualified for the vaccine in Texas, even though they both live in Colorado. But in Colorado, they can't get the vaccine. Not yet.
I decided it was worth the investment, the 14-hour round-trip drive.
What's a 14-hour drive when I can help the human race get to herd immunity just a little bit faster?
In Amarillo, there's no residency requirement for the Civic Center clinic. Peggy says she saw plates in the parking lot from all over, as far away as Minnesota.
They said the hotel was fully booked that night that we were there because they had a rodeo, a volleyball tournament, and the vaccination clinic going on in town. So it was just like a city event that was happening.
States surrounding Colorado are all kind of doing the same thing with a few differences here and there, but most of Colorado's neighbors allow people with only one pre-existing condition to get the vaccine. It doesn't mean all are opening their doors like Texas. Wyoming, for example, requires you to prove you're from or work in that state.
I have had both of my heart valves replaced.
Ryan Hickman from Loveland doesn't qualify under Phase 1B3, which starts in Colorado on Friday. So he and his wife, who has asthma, are planning a road trip of their own to Oklahoma to get the vaccine and visit family.
We just want to get that first shot and then look toward maybe being able to get that second shot here once things are a little more calm and a little more available.
I am a long-term cancer survivor, and through that journey, I learned that I have to be my own advocate, and I can't wait for the system to take care of me.
I've heard from quite a few people who made that trip to Amarillo and others who just made trips to Texas. And despite that, as of last week, Amarillo's health department told reporters that only 6% of their vaccines have gone to people who live outside the Texas Panhandle. And when I reached out to the state of Texas and their health department as a whole, they told me 99.34% of vaccines given in Texas have gone to those who live in Texas.
6% outside the Panhandle, Steve, would be considerably more than we're seeing in Colorado. So clearly there is a magnet effect there in Texas, but it's not something that's just kind of like off the charts. I should also say we had a very serious discussion man-to-man about whether or not you were going to put George Strait puns in that story, and we agreed that you were not, and I respect you abiding by that agreement.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to cheer who cheated who, right? I didn't want to do that, so I didn't do it to you.
Stephen. Okay. All right. Thank you.
That's George Strait, right?
More than 16% of our state's total population now has the first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. It's good news. We're coming up on 1 million people who will have received the shot. More than half of the current total have both shots. 355 people are currently hospitalized in Colorado with COVID-19. It's down 14 patients from the day before. It's only down 32 patients from this time last week. And just look at the chart. You can tell hospitalizations had been sharply declining, but now that has slowed down considerably. Our positivity rate took a significant and encouraging one-day drop yesterday, going from over 5% to just under 4%. It brings our 7-day moving average to 3.4%, safely under the level where public health experts would be really concerned. You see what's happening, though, with these numbers. We've entered this plateau phase in terms of COVID cases and COVID hospitalizations. We're seeing it on the level of Denver, Colorado as a whole, and we're also seeing the same similar thing happen nationwide. Important to note, we're leveling out at a far higher case rate than we did last year when things leveled out for a time. But there's encouraging news once you dig into the hospitalization numbers. My colleague Chris Vanderveen noted today that the oldest Coloradans make up a far smaller percentage of COVID-19 hospitalizations than they did. People 80 plus, they were 20% of COVID hospitalizations at the end of last year. That has been cut by about 2/3. They're now less than 7% of the COVID hospitalizations. You got to remember, that's the age group that represents more than half of Colorado's COVID deaths, the most vulnerable population. And you can see vaccines are at work right there in those numbers. That means that lives are being saved. But we can't forget that there are often serious, lasting complications for people who get sick enough with COVID that they end up hospitalized. It's not mission accomplished at this point, but it is certainly progress worth celebrating. Hey, if you are in or around Parker this evening, would ask that you please keep an eye out for this young girl. The sheriff's office, along with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, is out looking for 12-year-old Catherine Gould. She left home on her bike, headed for school this morning, Mammoth Heights Elementary, and she never showed up. Investigators say they have no reason to think that Catherine's a runaway. That's why they're asking for the public's help pretty aggressively tonight. Catherine's 5'4". She got that short brown hair. She left home this morning riding a gray women's Trek bike. She's wearing dark clothing. Anyone who sees her is asked to call 911. Xcel wants to put you on the installment plan to pay off the expensive natural gas and electricity that Xcel bought over that freezing cold Valentine's Day weekend. The governor wants proof from Colorado's energy providers that they first asked Coloradans to conserve energy before they went out, paid those high prices, then passed them along to you. Well, now we have some hard numbers on what that cold weekend will cost us. Here's Marshall Zellinger.
Xcel Energy estimates that it will have to charge gas customers $7.50 extra a month for 2 years and electric customers $3.50 extra a month for 2 years to make back the money it spent on gas and electricity in mid-February. Those costs were detailed in this 4-page letter to Democratic Governor Jared Polis and state regulators. If, like many in the metro area, you get both gas and electric from Xcel, that's $11 extra a month for 2 years, totaling $264. State regulators are investigating why energy companies spent so much on gas and electricity over a few days last month, and if the reasons justify passing along all the costs to customers. For instance, Platte River Power Authority used social media on Valentine's Day to alert customers in Estes Park, Fort Collins, Longmont, and Loveland to conserve energy because of a natural gas shortage. Polis wants proof from all energy companies that they did the same before buying energy that was 100 times as costly as normal.
If after all that, every step you can within reason you've taken to reduce usage, if there are still costs because of short-term volatility, then it's a fair conversation about the proper allocation between shareholders and between customers. But I, as governor, want to do everything I can to protect customers. We are not Texas. Consumers should not be expected to shoulder unexpected exceptional costs without first being advised to reduce usage.
Xcel provided these screenshots, 3 paid Facebook ads, and that one Facebook post with those dogs as one piece of evidence of how it alerted customers to conserve. Xcel also responded to a 9 News question on Valentine's Day with emailed conservation tips for customers. In the letter to the governor, Xcel explained that it interrupted gas service for those who have signed an agreement that allows that to happen, but that the company purposefully did not use reverse notification to customers' phones. These system emergencies relate to outages and safety, not market price volatility and economics.
State regulators have given the power companies until Friday to provide proof of what they did to get customers to conserve and why they spent so much money on gas and electricity when it was at such a high price. I want to point out one thing. The proof that Xcel provided about those 3 Facebook ads. I used the Facebook ad library, which I normally use to research political ads on Facebook. It tells you the demographics, how much was spent, things like that. I can't find those 3 ads from Xcel. I asked for more proof from Xcel. I don't have it yet, Kyle, but when I do, I'll pass it along.
This entire program is now just my friends trolling me. That's all this is. The entire program has devolved into that. It's a very nice fireplace, Marshall. That's very, very impressive. It's even nicer than your mailbox.
We're trying different places that are relevant for the stories this week.
Yeah. No, that's great. Tomorrow night's on a pier. All right, thank you, Marshall. Colorado Democrats are issuing a bit of a threat to health insurance companies, trying to get them to bring their premiums down. This will be familiar to you parents out there. They're starting with a countdown and more notice for renters facing eviction. A legislator tells us why it's necessary, and a landlord tells us why it'll create new problems. Next. The Democrats who control Colorado's state legislature are going to try to pass an ultimatum for Colorado's health insurance companies. Either they can lower premiums on their own, or the state will get more involved in health care through a public insurance option. Marianne Goodland, ace reporter over at Colorado Politics, got a hold of the draft bill on this public option. It gives insurance companies 2 years to bring individual market premiums down by 20% statewide. It's just the individual market. If they're not able to do that, then the state would spin up a public insurance option for the individual market and the small group market. We have talked about the potential for looming evictions when the federal ban on evictions is lifted. Democrats in our state legislature are also discussing a bill that would require that landlords give tenants 14 days notice instead of 10 days notice and could only hike their rent once a year. Democratic Rep. Dominique Jackson from Aurora is one of the sponsors.
I don't run these bills, and my colleagues don't run these bills to hammer at landlords, right? Or to make life unfair. Like I said, we're just trying to balance the scales of justice. But we have to recognize that our small efforts to balance those scales of justice are based on historic and systemic racism and oppression in housing.
For a landlord's perspective on this, we talked with Debbie Stobie. She owns an apartment building with 24 units in Lakewood, and asked her, what would be the harm in giving tenants another 4 days notice of an eviction?
Because it was 3 days just a year or two ago, but it just keeps pushing it back. So now it's the middle of the month before landlords know if they're going to get paid and what if they're going to have to start eviction proceedings. It effectively means there's 14 days with nothing can happen. You have 2 weeks to pay your rent. And so if 3 tenants do it, 4 tenants, 5 tenants, 6 tenants, because there's no late fee or deterrent or, it shifts everything to the middle of the month instead of the first of the month.
Stobie also took issue with the idea of lumping small landlords in with the really big operations in one bill. Republicans at the state legislature, they're trying to limit the power of public health orders. They fought with the governor a lot on those, but the bottom line is they don't have the power at the state legislature to do it. They're trying a couple attacks on this. Republican State Senator Barbara Kirkmeyer, who refused to enforce public health orders when she was recently a Weld County commissioner, wants them opened up for public comment.
So they've been passing public health orders that are essentially a rule, but yet they haven't been going through the public notice or the public process, public hearing process to allow, in this case, my example, all restaurant owners to have an understanding of what's in the rule, what they're expected to do.
The rural process Senator Kirkmeyer is talking about there would also mean that public health orders would expire after 120 days. Her bill, along with a similar one from Colorado Springs Republican Senator Bob Gardner, did not make it at the state capitol. Both those bills died today. 1 year ago today, Colorado was investigating but did not yet have its first confirmed case of COVID. And a conspiracy theory that persists to this day was just getting started. We've been unable to put it on ice. Maybe he could help. The most Colorado thing we saw today. Next. Looking back at where we were at this point in the year 2020 allows us to reflect a bit because, let's be honest, it's been a year. A year ago today, Colorado was investigating its first potential cases of COVID-19. We were still calling it coronavirus then. And we, as in we reporters, had this quaint idea that maybe if it popped up in Denver, just quarantining little specific parts of the city might be enough to get the virus under control. Colorado still does not have an officially confirmed case of COVID-19 coronavirus. Today, Denver Mayor Michael Hancock came out to say that 3 potential cases in Denver are being tested right now. 6 more potential cases around the state are being tested. Hancock said that 23 statewide came back as negative. But do not be fooled into thinking that the virus won't come here. So we need to be turning our attention to preparation. Mayor Hancock was asked about his powers to quarantine zones within the city.
In the city of Denver, we have the ability to, in partnership and consultation with the public health officer, Bob McDonald, to restrict areas that we deem might be a public health threat. And so we can do that.
Yeah, we look back so that we can gain some perspective on what we knew and what we didn't know when. The whole idea of how COVID is no worse than the flu, that whataboutism started real early, and it continues to this day, even with more than 500,000 Americans dead of COVID-19. 1 year ago today on this program, our Steve Steger looked at that particularly dangerous delusion.
What about the flu, you ask? So far this year, the CDC estimates there have been at least 32 million cases of the flu, resulting in at least 18,000 deaths, a far lower number than the current 43 confirmed cases and 6 deaths associated with coronavirus in the U.S.
Flu is a known devil. We've had the flu around for many, many years. We understand how it works. We have vaccines to prevent the flu. With the coronavirus, it's an unknown devil. So there's so little that we know about it. It's a rapidly evolving situation, and we're learning very quickly about it.
There is so much we don't know and don't have. There's no antiviral treatment for it yet, no vaccine.
A year later, we've got that vaccine. I mean, who would have thought? We're pretty speedy on that. You got to credit all the scientists, all the researchers, and the study participants, as well as the Trump administration for its prioritization of Operation Warp Speed. As for the flu and what happened to that, our social distancing, mask wearing, hand washing seems to have basically made the flu disappear. It's at a 25-year low in this country. In Colorado last year, there were only 12 reported flu hospitalizations, down 97% from the year prior. Ice on the rocks. Neat. It's the most Colorado thing we saw today. That and your feedback next. The most Colorado thing we saw today is a weekend climb on the ice. Video in from Farron, who was in Ouray on Sunday when he spotted a guy climbing the ice in Black Box Canyon. You ever see somebody do something and your initial reaction is, I'm never going to be able to do that in my life. Not even if I tried. Like maybe there was a day that if I tried hard enough, I could have figured out how to do this. But no, they are going to put me in a box in the ground and I will not have done that. Anyway, that was my reaction. This is very impressive and very cool of Farron to share it with us. Send us the most Colorado things you see. Email next@9news.com or get our attention on Twitter with the hashtag HeyNext. Don Stanley writes in tonight to say, it's interesting that Excel used social media to call for energy conservation. What about those of us who do not have a social media presence? You know, Don, I think this whole thing with Excel, what they paid for natural gas along with other energy providers, the governor now getting involved, say that consumers need warning, maybe the ability to opt into a rolling blackout. I think it's at least going to start a conversation about what qualifies as that notice. Alex Hansen noted that Steve Steger listed an Alan Jackson song in his George Strait story. It's because he thought that I referenced a Gary Allen song.